Wojtek, a bear, enlisted as a private in 1944 with the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, Polish Takar. At the Battle of Monte Cassino, he carried 100-pound shells across a battlefield under constant enemy fire. Soldiers laughed at the idea of a bear in battle. Officers doubted him. But what Wojtek did next would prove them all wrong and make him a legend. At first, the soldiers couldn't take him seriously. A bear carrying shells? It seemed impossible. They laughed. The officers doubted him. But under relentless fire, Wojtek moved faster and stronger than any man could. Every crate he carried saved lives. And here's the question: how could a bear survive a battlefield where men feared to go? Think Wojtek was just a bear? Stay until the end to see the unbelievable moment when he became a true soldier, an act that left everyone speechless. Alone, orphaned, and smaller than a soldier's boot, he shouldn't have survived a single night in the camp. Cold nights, hunger, and war all worked against him. Yet somehow, he ended up in the hands of the men who would soon discover that this fragile cub was anything but ordinary. By 1942, the Polish II Corps had been driven out of their homeland after Poland's fall, forced into a long journey across foreign lands. The soldiers endured long marches, scarce rations, relentless drills, and the constant threat of enemy attacks. Hope was fragile, and each day brought uncertainty and fear. It was during this campaign, somewhere near the Iranian frontier, that the men found the tiny bear cub. A local boy had been caring for him, trading the cub for scraps of food. He was barely able to keep himself alive. The cub was frail, trembling, and clearly not built to survive such brutal conditions. Moved by the cub's vulnerability, the soldiers took him in. They shared their meager rations, improvising bottles of condensed milk and leftover scraps. Blankets were arranged for him to sleep alongside the men. During brief moments of calm, he tumbled across the camp, chasing sticks, batting at boots, and wrestling tin cans. Laughter, rare in the midst of war, briefly broke the tension in the camp. Could a tiny bear cub, just a few months old, really survive long enough to become part of a fighting unit in a war-torn world? The men quickly grew attached. Wojtek, as he was named, became more than a mascot. He became a symbol of hope. His small gestures, a lick, a playful swipe, evoked memories of home and ordinary life, far from the front. Soldiers competed to carry him, fed him hidden treats, and spoke to him as though he could understand every word. According to those who served with him, his presence eased the strain of daily hardship. Over time, the bear's constant presence lifted spirits and fostered camaraderie. As months passed, the young cub began to watch and imitate the men, lifting crates, following routines, even attempting awkward salutes in his bear-like way. These small acts of mimicry were more than play. They were the first hints that this cub would one day do something extraordinary, changing the role of animals in the unit forever. And none of them yet knew that their mascot would soon be carrying live artillery into one of the war's fiercest battles. In later accounts, many of these men would point to these early days as the moment they realized Wojtek was becoming more than a mascot. Before he would ever carry artillery under fire, Wojtek had to become useful in the unit's daily life. He was no longer just a cub. He had become part of the Polish II Corps' daily rhythm. He slept near the soldiers, followed them during camp movements, and ate at the same hours. At first he lingered at a distance, curious but cautious. Soon he would approach whenever he heard familiar voices, seeking shelter beside the men he had come to trust. By mid-1943, the fragile cub had grown into a bear of impressive size. He could drag buckets and boxes that even some recruits struggled with, and his playful antics sometimes sent lighter equipment crashing to the ground. What had once been a vulnerable animal was now a strong, capable presence, a symbol of both amusement and admiration. The young bear didn't just grow in size. He learned. Wojtek observed the soldiers closely, watching drills and routines. He began to imitate what he saw, lifting crates when supplies were carried, following marching columns, responding to simple commands like come, stop, or drop. Each successful attempt reinforced the bond with his unit. According to the men, he seemed to understand their intentions, often anticipating their needs before they could voice them. At that point, was he still just a mascot, or already a working member of the unit? At first he was a source of distraction and light relief, a welcome break from the relentless stress of campaign life. But over time, Wojtek was treated as one of us. Soldiers joked that he worked harder than some of the new recruits. They gave him rations, organized playful exercises, and even discussed promotions, pay, and rank, not as idle amusement, but as a way to integrate him into the unit's official structure. Soon, those jokes would turn into official documents. There was, of course, a bureaucratic challenge. Moving a bear across borders, on military convoys and ships, was impossible without paperwork. Animals were not covered under standard regulations. The solution was pragmatic. Wojtek was enlisted. He received an official service number, a rank of private, and a supply of standard rations. His rank was more than a joke. It allowed him to participate legitimately in the unit's work. Before Monte Cassino, Wojtek's role was primarily logistical. He carried or moved lighter crates, assisted in hauling supplies, and helped push or pull heavier objects. His presence made physically demanding work more bearable and elevated morale. For many soldiers, he was no longer a novelty. He was a partner in daily survival. Not everyone outside the unit believed it. Some officers doubted the practicality of a soldier bear. To outsiders, it sounded like legend, but those who worked with him defended him, citing both morale and the tangible help he provided. Until this point, Wojtek was, for many, merely a military curiosity, a bear with a service number. The true test would come when the unit was sent to one of the war's most brutal battlefields, Monte Cassino, and Wojtek walked into it with them. Monte Cassino, a fortified position in central Italy controlling the route to Rome, it had become a symbol of relentless battle. Several previous assaults had failed, leaving a trail of human losses and destroyed equipment. By the time the Polish II Corps arrived, the location was already synonymous with brutal combat. The Corps, part of the Allied forces, was assigned to one of the hardest sectors of the offensive, where progress demanded discipline and extreme endurance. The 22nd Artillery Supply Company, Wojtek's unit, had a specific role transporting artillery shells and supplies to batteries in operation. Distances were long, routes dangerously exposed to shelling and enemy fire. The terrain was steep, shattered, and exhausting. Soldiers, already fatigued, made repeated trips carrying heavy crates. They knew that if they stopped, the artillery would stop as well. Every delivery was crucial to keeping pressure on the enemy. Before Monte Cassino, Wojtek had already been participating in the unit's daily logistics, helping move loads and learning the patterns of routine. He followed soldiers during internal movements, ate at the same times, and slept close to the men. When the unit was sent to the front, he went with them, remaining an active part of the effort. At first, no one had planned for a bear to take part in the battle itself, but the chaos of Monte Cassino would change that. Under intense fire, soldiers carried crates of shells, each step marked by tension and the roar of explosions. Wojtek watched closely, familiar with this type of work. At one point, he approached a stack of crates, lifted one as he had done in camp, and began walking with it. The men's reaction was immediate: surprise, nervous laughter, and expressions of disbelief. Yet he completed the route without dropping the crate, repeating the action with the same determination under the attentive and astonished eyes of the soldiers. Over the following days, a series of tense moments tested both men and bear. On one stretch, he carried a shell while explosions echoed around. Soldiers instinctively took cover. Wojtek pressed on undeterred. On another, he crossed difficult ground that demanded visible effort, yet completed the delivery. In a particularly urgent moment, when ammunition was critical to keep the batteries operational, his participation helped maintain the unit's rhythm. From that point, no one within the company treated his help as a game. He was a functional member of the unit. Outside observers and some officers were skeptical. Some found the idea of a soldier bear absurd or impractical. But for the 22nd Artillery Supply Company, he was part of the operational effort. Later, the company adopted an emblem of a bear carrying a shell, a direct reference to Wojtek and his role during the battle. Wojtek's impact on operations was concrete. He did not decide the outcome of the battle, but he carried shells that allowed artillery batteries to remain active longer, reducing the physical load on some soldiers. In later accounts, many veterans recalled the sight of a bear transporting ammunition as one of the most unforgettable images of that period. The psychological effect on the men was equally significant. Amid fear and exhaustion, seeing a bear performing the same work created an image so absurd it helped break the terror, even if only momentarily. It became a constant topic among soldiers, almost an internal story of survival and resilience. For many, he ceased to be an animal and became a comrade in uniform, remembered as an integral part of the unit and its collective effort. Monte Cassino marked the peak of Wojtek's participation in combat. His physical and symbolic presence on the front line solidified his reputation. When the battle finally ended and the unit moved on, one question remained: what kind of life could ever await a bear who had served as a soldier? After the intense battles of Monte Cassino, the front lines began to shift. The Polish II Corps continued advancing through Italy, but the nature of their operations was changing. The chaos of active combat gave way to long marches, logistical reorganizations, and eventually the early stages of demobilization. The adrenaline of battle receded, replaced by a quieter, more uncertain routine. Yet one question lingered from Monte Cassino: what was to become of a bear who had served as a soldier? This was more than a curiosity. It was a practical and emotional question for the men who had served with him. Wojtek was officially enlisted, with a service number and a rank. The army was downsizing, soldiers were returning home or finding new postings, and Wojtek could not simply accompany them. The decision was made to relocate Wojtek to a safe and stable environment. He would be sent to a zoo in the United Kingdom, where he could receive proper care, secure food, and veterinary attention. For the soldiers, the choice was fraught with emotion. This was a companion, a fellow soldier now being handed over to a world of fences and enclosures. Some promised to visit. Others quietly mourned the separation, aware that their daily routines had included a massive, capable bear who now would live among civilians and tourists rather than comrades in uniform. Wojtek's transition to civilian life was gradual but telling. In the zoo, he adapted to his new environment, forming bonds with caretakers and reacting to familiar voices, especially those speaking Polish. Visitors marveled at the bear who had once marched with soldiers, carried artillery shells, and shared in the rhythms of military life. Though removed from the battlefield, Wojtek retained the presence and dignity that had defined him in the field. Over the years, his story began to take on a life beyond the zoo. Veterans shared anecdotes of the bear who had lifted morale under fire. Articles, books, and documentaries recounted his exploits. Monuments and commemorations cemented his role as more than a unit mascot. Wojtek became a symbol of Polish resilience, of the oddities and courage of wartime life, and of the unexpected ways that humans and animals could bond in extreme circumstances. For the soldiers who had known him, Wojtek remained a living memory of companionship and perseverance. For history, he became an enduring emblem of war, identity, and the traces left in memory. Even in peace, Wojtek carried the weight of his past, a reminder that history is shaped not only by humans, but also by those who serve alongside them in extraordinary ways. With Monte Cassino behind them, the most intense phase of the Italian campaign was over. The Polish II Corps moved through quieter sectors, focusing on long marches, reorganizations, and supply operations. The adrenaline of battle gave way to a slower, more reflective pace. Soldiers faced a new reality. The war continued, but the daily strain of frontline combat was easing, and thoughts of peacetime slowly began to emerge. It was a strange in-between moment, no longer pure chaos, not yet real peace. A pressing question arose: what would become of a bear who had served as a soldier? This was not a trivial curiosity. Wojtek had a service number and a rank, yet the army was demobilizing, and soldiers were dispersing. The question was both practical: where would he live, who would care for him, and emotional, as men prepared to part with a companion who had shared hardship, danger, and daily routines alongside them. It is hard to imagine what it felt like to sign off a bear as a fellow soldier. The decision was made to transfer Wojtek to a stable environment in the United Kingdom. Practical concerns guided this choice. He would have reliable food, veterinary care, and protection from the uncertainties of post-war life. For the men, it was a bittersweet moment. They were sending a fellow soldier into captivity of sorts, promising to visit whenever possible, and silently mourning the daily companionship that had grown between man and bear. In the paperwork, it looked like logistics; in their memories, it felt like a farewell. Wojtek's arrival at the zoo marked a sharp contrast from the front lines. He adapted gradually to his new routine, responding to caretakers and occasionally recognizing Polish voices. The public, learning that this bear had carried artillery and marched with soldiers, watched him with a mixture of curiosity and admiration. His cage became more than an enclosure; it was a window into a remarkable story of loyalty, courage, and the unexpected bonds forged in war. For many visitors, he was the closest they would ever come to that front. Over the years, veterans kept Wojtek's memory alive through stories and recollections. Articles, books, documentaries, and museum exhibits spread his legend beyond the zoo. Monuments, plaques, and statues appeared, transforming him from a unit mascot into a symbol of the Polish wartime experience and the broader role of animals in human conflicts. A bear that had once passed ammunition now carried the weight of memory for an entire generation. For those who served with him, Wojtek embodied camaraderie, humor in the midst of horror, and perseverance. For history, he became an emblem of identity, memory, and the presence of animals in war. Even in peace, Wojtek carried the weight of his past, a reminder that history is shaped not only by humans, but also by those who serve alongside them in extraordinary ways. In the final block, that weight turns into a question: what does his story say about how wars are remembered, and about who we choose to remember? Even in peace, Wojtek carried the weight of his past. In his movements, in the way he responded to familiar voices, he held traces of the battles he had walked through. Some wars never truly end; they persist quietly in the memories of those who returned. The story of Wojtek shows that wars are not made solely of dates and generals, but also of improbable relationships. A soldier bear reveals the concrete realities of combat: exhaustion, fear, and the small consolations that keep men going. What official records note is only part of the story. The rest survives in troop jokes, faded photographs, and the memory of mascots. It is in this space between formal history and personal recollection that Wojtek lives on, a living memory of the soldiers who served alongside him. For the Polish soldiers, Wojtek was more than a bear. He was a piece of home walking with them. Many could not return to their homeland after the war, yet figures like Wojtek helped preserve their sense of identity and belonging. Veterans scattered across the world told stories of a bear who served with them, a companion of the unit, a reminder of who they were. Remembering Wojtek is also remembering these men far from their country, not just a remarkable curiosity of war. Today, wars and crises flash across our screens for a moment and then disappear. In the middle of that constant noise, it is easy for smaller stories to be lost. Many tales of animals in war will never be told. Some are buried in family albums, in small local museums, or in the memories of a few people who still remember. Preserving and sharing stories like Wojtek's is one way to slow down that fading and to keep a more human and animal side of history alive. Wojtek sits in his enclosure, a bear in a zoo, yet behind the bars is the weight of an entire war. He does not speak, he does not march, but for those who know his story, he carries the echoes of battles, camaraderie, and courage. Sometimes one animal is enough to keep a whole chapter of history alive. Here, the goal is to bring forward the real stories of animals in war, using historical records and first-hand accounts. Not everyone watches a video all the way to the end, so if you are still here, it is because these stories are important to you. Then subscribe and join us for new videos every day so you do not miss the next stories we uncover together. Comment which other stories of animals in war you would like to see explored, and share with those who help keep memories like Wojtek's alive. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.